Alright, so good morning everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. Welcome back. So in the last video you guys saw me like chaos gardening. We saw some volunteer plants happening, and I just want to explain like why this is and why this happens. Okay, I chaos garden because I don't have the patience for a lot of things. Things like lettuce seeds, carrot seeds, most root things. I just don't have the patience to sit there and make sure they're like perfect. I drive myself insane. I feel like it gets overwhelming, and I feel like they're so tiny that the more you spread, the better germination rate you get. And I know a lot of people have started doing this. You see it all over TikTok, etc., that people are chaos gardening, and I actually really love it. And it really discourages me from trying to think it needs to be perfect. And it really just kind of helps out, you know, time-wise and that sort of thing. Things like carrots, lettuce, tomato seeds, even anything that's really tiny and annoying to put in perfectly. So I started doing more chaos gardening, especially when they're in beds and I'm trying to do seedlings, which I feel like I might give up on seedlings. I feel like I'm terrible at doing seedlings. That is why my plan for this fall is to hoop this entire area. It's pretty huge. It's 13 beds. That way I can start things in the beds early, as if I'm doing like a seedling start. So I'm just kind of terrible with it. I do have a greenhouse, and I got it specifically for seedlings, and I'm absolutely terrible with it. So I'm just going to actually be growing things in the pots that I actually want them in, so I do less up potting and doing it. I'm going to do it that way. So that's just part of trying to make things simple for myself. My goal is for us to be able to eat from the garden year round, and for me to do it primarily by myself can get really overwhelming, and I feel like for a lot of people it does, and that's why they quit gardening. But I really love to garden. So what I'm going to do is just try to make my life easier. And this started by accident. The chaos gardening started out of frustration, right? Just like, just gonna throw some down, see what happens. And I ended up doing really well. Sometimes just the more stressed out you get about it, it just doesn't work out. And then some things happen by accident. So I do a chop and drop method at the end of the summer season. And again, out of sheer just impatience, I accidentally discovered doing the chop and drop method without taking all my vegetables off. For example, my cherry tomatoes. I didn't do a single seedling for cherry tomatoes this year because I had so many volunteers. I had about, I don't know, 30 volunteer plants for tomatoes, or cherry tomatoes. They just kind of overwintered themselves. So I chop things down at like a soil level and kind of chop it a little smaller, and I throw it on top of the bed, and then I throw like chicken manure that's been composted down and kind of aged some in their coop. I do a deep litter method, so I don't actually clean their run or the coop out very often. I just turn it over and I add new bedding, and I keep doing that until it's all nice and super broken down, and I use it in the garden. And I end up throwing the compost on top of that. It helps to break down, because it's a hot compost, so it does help to break down the food that I've chopped and dropped. And then it put nutrients in my beds over the winter. Well, then what happened is in the spring, like mid to late spring, I get all these really awesome volunteer plants. I got volunteer tomatoes first, but then I started getting volunteer lots of stuff like sunflowers, which started to become invasive. As you see, I have a ton up here, and this is me only leaving about 20% of them because sunflowers really like nitrogen, and that's my corn bed. And I did sunflowers only in a very tiny bed in the middle of my corn beds, and they spread everywhere because when the squirrels climb up there, they shake the seeds around, or when the crows come and grab them when they're done, they shake the seeds around. I could mitigate this by chopping all the heads off, but I'm sure there's lots of seeds in there still that will come up, so I do have to weed them out and thin them out. I was able to successfully transplant some of them into pots, and they're about to get heads on them, or they have little heads on them, but they're about to like bloom open. So I took all of my volunteer tomato plants and I planted them here. This bed is full of them. I kind of packed them in there kind of tightly, and I want to say it's a 4 foot by 4 foot or 4 foot by 5 foot bed. And cherry tomatoes are indeterminate. They get really, really huge, but these ones stayed more compact. They are staying under the arch. I want to say that's like 4.5 feet to the top of the arch, and they have tons of blossoms. I did pick off the very early blossoms when they were like, I don't know, like a foot tall, 6 inches tall. I went ahead and, sorry guys, I'm totally fidgety. I went ahead and picked off all the blossoms so that they can continue to grow, but I kind of forgot about them. And when they start getting a bunch of blossoms on them, they will stop growing in height as much, and they will just start to produce fruit. And because our season got started so late, there's so much noise out here. Oh my gosh, there's a bird, there's my neighbors, there's airplanes, there was a huge truck. Whatever. Urban homesteading life, that is just how it goes. We are not out in the country. So I just let them grow, so now they're all about 3.5 feet tall, and they have tons of blossoms on them. And I did go in there and kind of like prune like the very bottoms of them so they would have good airflow, because I do have them in there compactly. So I find that if I really pack tomatoes in, especially the cherry tomatoes, you know, you get like the little teeny tiny ones, I feel you can compact those in a lot easier as long as you have good airflow in the bottom. So I do go in and prune the bottoms of them. It's easier to get water in there. It's easier to put compost in there or amendments or whatever it is that I need. And I do have to amend them a little more, but that I have anywhere from 9 to 12 plants in there easily in that bed, and it's working out great. They have dozens and dozens of tomatoes in there already, and they're already starting to ripen. Our weather is super unpredictable. Last week was a heat wave of almost 100 for like 6 days straight, 5 days straight. It seemed like forever. And this morning, as of right now, it's 56 degrees out. So yeah, that's Washington. So I got those, and then in the last video you saw that I had a volunteer potato plant. I have no idea where it came from, other than I pulled out potato plants that didn't do anything because I put them in there, probably too many, and they had like little potatoes, and I just chop and drop. And so when you chop and drop and you don't take the food off of them, a lot of them can overwinter and go to seed. They get that cold stratification going on, even things that don't necessarily need it, and they will just start to grow. In fact, I had a volunteer tomato and a volunteer potato next to each other, and even though you're not technically supposed to grow them near each other, simply because they can compete for nutrients, or they can have like the same diseases, I did not have a problem with that. I'm not saying go do it purposely, but it ended up working out well for me. And I have volunteer tomatoes all over the garden, and I had to end up actually weeding them out. So they do become invasive, and you have to weed them out eventually. Weeding volunteer plants out is a lot easier than trying to grow seedlings. It's much faster, and they do give some nutrients to the soil, and their root systems create really healthy soil, and it doesn't get compacted, and it's just, I find it to be really fun and interesting to see what pops up. So things that came up voluntarily all over my garden: borage, which is over there. In fact, I had borage only in one bed last year, and then that bed in the very front corner, and I ended up getting borage all over my garden, including in the rocks, because it just sells seeds everywhere. People get really like, oh, don't plant certain herbs because they just get super invasive, and you know, put them in little pots and stuff, and I just don't care. I'm okay with it. The crows are upset I haven't fed them yet. So I like to see what I can get away with in the garden, and every year I expand the garden despite the fact that I have seemingly less and less time every year. So let's see what else. I had potatoes volunteer. I had they're all coming for their peanuts. See, I had tomatoes, potatoes, lots of herbs, chocolate mint, calendula, dill, In fact, this bed right here, where the echinacea is, used to be filled with dill and nothing but dill almost, because it sells seeds and spreads everywhere. The only place I had dill this last year is right here in this little bed where I'm throwing things. Boop, right there. I just had one tiny little plant and that was it. My daughter's Wednesday today, so I should call me Morticia. So I just had like dill right there, but I hadn't had any dill last year. It just magically popped up right there. This bed is full of echinacea, sage, and mint, chocolate mint specifically. All my regular mint went away and the chocolate mint took over, but it's fine. I harvest it really frequently. If it goes to seed, it's not a big deal. I don't care. And as you saw in my last video when I was trying to make room for things to plant, I have a lot of weeds in my garden. Again, unless it's impeding with my seeds growing, I don't care. And that's just part of that chaos gardening, because that bed that had all the grass and the clover and a few dandelions in it, and it kind of took over, my onions still grew well. I had other things in there that grew really well, and I really didn't really have to water it because it just stayed moist. When I planted seeds in there and like little new baby seedlings of like onions and stuff, the birds didn't bother, the animals didn't bother it, because it's in a little jungle and it's protected. So it's protected from extreme heat, it's protected from getting too dried out, it's protected from animals, and I only weed when I need to. I only weed if I need to make space for something. I only weed if something is kind of getting in the way or impeding growth. So for example, my garlic is getting a little too many weeds in there, so I pulled some out that were getting too, like, encroaching too much on the garlic. But I only did it as needed. I have some weird sticky weed growing all in my red cabbage bed. There's 6 red cabbages and nothing else, soon there will be, but I'm not bothering it because it's not hurting the plant and it's keeping the soil moist and from drying out, because it's just creating this really cool like natural mulch. So chaos gardening leads to volunteer plants, it leads to less weeding. Your garden looks more chaotic and not picture perfect, but I think that that's a normal garden, and most people try to make things super perfect and super pretty. And this year I will be putting more straw and different mulches like that in there, and it does stomp out some of the weeds, but I just don't feel it's completely necessary. I don't know if this is a popular opinion or not. I just don't find it super necessary to do a lot of weeding unless it is negatively impacting the garden or a specific plant, and then I will like weed around that specific plant, because it always comes back. The wind carries pollen and seeds, the birds carry seeds, the squirrels plant all sorts of stuff in my garden I don't want, and I just leave it until it is a problem. And it also leads me to not being out here and stressing that my garden is looking perfect and like ready for a magazine. I don't care. It's totally fine. So it works for me. I'm busy, but I also love to garden. So that really is just kind of the compromise, and now it's the norm. It's what I do. That's the other thing. We have a lot of moles, and even though I put metal down in the bottom of my garden beds when we originally did them years ago, the moles still come through. They still find a way, and so do weeds. Weeds will find a way anywhere. So you'll drive yourself absolutely mad if you continue to try to make it perfect. So yeah, so I guess that's it. This is getting pretty long, but I just wanted to sit down and have a chat with you, because I just find that chaos gardening is kind of just the way for me. It just limits perfection. There's so many interesting things that pop up and really ends up being a really cool, beautiful little permaculture of things. And you know, I really have to just work with what I have that's native, right? I'm gonna get plantain, I'm gonna get dandelions, I'm gonna get grass is gonna be invasive, because I live in Western Washington. That stuff is everywhere here. If you try to get rid of it completely, you really will just drive yourself mad, and it's unnecessary. It really is. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you for stopping by, and thanks for hanging out with me. I'm gonna let you guys go, and you guys have a great morning.